Give me one night to get it out of my system, just one, before we start trying for kids. That wasn't a line from some sleazy podcast or a throwaway Reddit confession. That was my wife, Emma, barefoot on our kitchen tile in our little starter home in Garland, Texas, holding a wooden spoon like a judge's gavel over a pot of marinara on a Tuesday night in late October. Eyes steady, tone calm, like she'd practiced the sentence in the bathroom mirror with the faucet running to drown out her own heartbeat. My name's Ryan, 34, operations manager for a HVAC supply outfit out in Mesquite. And if you'd asked me a year earlier whether the woman I married would ever put that ask on the table, I would have laughed and said something like, Emma, she's a Sunday morning coffee, Target return receipts in order, Trader Joe's sample kind of woman. We met the way a lot of Dallas stories begin, under fluorescent lights and air conditioning that's too cold. It was a Friday night line at Keller's Drive-In off West Northwest Highway, me in a faded Ranger's cap, her in a denim jacket with a busted copper button and a sunburned stripe on her neck from a patio happy hour. I bought 2 cheeseburgers, she dropped a fry, I made a stupid joke, she laughed, and we ended up eating on the tailgate of my F-150, the paper bags going translucent with grease while a high school football scoreboard blinked in the distance like a steady heartbeat. Our first proper date was a Sunday at the State Fair of Texas, corn dogs and powdered sugar on her black leggings, me losing $20 trying to win her a stuffed bear I could have bought for 12. We shouted ourselves hoarse in the Cotton Bowl, and when the fireworks went off above Big Tex's hat, she slid her hand into mine in that innocent way that tells a man he's not just standing there, he's being chosen. We weren't fancy people. Our thing was diners that still have pie stands, backyard cookouts with cheap folding tables, and a gray igloo cooler loaded with Shiner Bock and Bud Light, and lazy road trips to Broken Bow or Fredericksburg, where your biggest concern is whether the B&B will have good coffee. I learned the cadence of Emma's life one detail at a time. She organizes receipts by merchant in a leather accordion folder. She tears the crust off her grilled cheese and feeds it to the dog. She lines up her shampoo and conditioner bottles so the labels face outward like they're posing for a catalog. We made a home out of hand-me-downs and such weekend projects, subway tile backsplash we did ourselves after a YouTube rabbit hole, a wobbly IKEA bookcase that leaned like it was listening to gossip, a living room rug that never lay flat at the corner, no matter how many times I taped it. I told myself that's what marriage is, 2 people tugging at the same corner of the rug until it cooperates. If this were a tidy, happy story, it would fast forward to a sonogram print stuck to the fridge with a souvenir magnet from a Buc-ee's in New Braunfels. But life has a way of sticking a fork in your socket just when you think you've child-proofed everything. The first flicker didn't feel like a problem. Emma fell in with a new crowd from her marketing firm after a reorg. People who say, "we're outside," in group texts and post rooftop photos with captions like, "main character energy." Her closest new friend was a woman named Liv, short for Olivia, who ran their influencer partnerships. Lev had a way of folding a conversation around herself like a fitted sheet, and she came preloaded with glossy stories about couples who reimagined monogamy the way developers reimagine neighborhoods. "Everyone we know is doing it," she'd purr over wine at our kitchen island, legs crossed, a toe tracing the air like she was stirring an invisible cocktail. "I'm not prudish. I'm practical. I grew up watching my dad leave before sunrise, tool belt clinking like a wind chime, and my mom marking down gas prices on a notepad to predict the next week's spend. My life has always been about inputs and outputs, what you put in, what you get out, what you can prove on paper. Marriage, I figured, worked the same. Communication in, trust out. So, when Emma started working later, I didn't flinch. Q4 was madness, she said. When she began showering at night, a new thing for a morning person, I said it's the Texas heat, maybe it helps her sleep. When she switched to Do Not Disturb on her phone after dinner, I told myself her boss had become boundary blind and this was self-care, not secrecy. The nights we used to fill with nothing, reruns of Shark Tank, a half-watched Mavericks game with the sound low, me fiddling with a squeaky cabinet hinge and her coloring in a Mindful Patterns book, slid into a kind of quiet that was too deliberate, like a stage set before the actors come out. Foreshadowing doesn't announce itself. It just collects in corners like dust. A missed call labeled "Live Urgent" at 9:57 p.m. that Emma declined with a quick flick. A new perfume that she swore she'd had for years, even though it still smelled like the department store card it came sprayed on. A gym bag in the trunk of her Accord, packed like a go bag. Sports bra, leggings, makeup wipes, tiny dry shampoo. Pilates at lunch, she'd say, though the mat looked brand new and unfurled only once to accommodate the dog. I noticed because that's what I do. At work, I track inventory down to the last condenser coil. At home, I track the way a person's eyes flick to the left when they're subtracting truth to make a story fit. Still, if you'd seen us at a backyard cookout 3 Saturdays before the one-night ask, me flipping jalapeno cheddar sausages, her setting out paper plates, neighbors passing around a bowl of homemade queso that separated if you looked at it wrong, you would have said we were the picture on a bank brochure titled Your First Mortgage. She leaned into me, laughed at my dumb joke about how the Cowboys were going to break my heart by Thanksgiving, and kissed me with the kind of easy familiarity that comes from 1,000 small choices to stay. Later that night, after the last Bud Light can clinked into the recycling and the citronella candles sputtered out, we lay on the couch, her feet tucked under my thigh, watching a docuseries about national parks. She rested her head on my chest and said, "Let's go to Big Ben next spring. And then, maybe..." She trailed off, eyes on the TV, but I knew where that sentence wanted to land. Maybe we start trying. Kids had been a soft focus plan between us, like a photo you haven't tapped to bring into clarity yet. We'd been responsible, paid off her student loans, built an emergency fund, upgraded my truck only when the old one's transmission sounded like a bag of bolts. We even picked out baby names once on a long drive back from Austin, laughing about how school administrators would mangle them on the first day anyway. So when she finally said "before kids" out loud in the kitchen weeks later, it should have been a warm doorway we walked through together, not the trap door it became. The day of the ask started ordinary. I took a service call in Duncanville to smooth over a contractor who claimed 30 boxes of air filters arrived damper than a church basement. Turned out he'd stored them in a garage with a busted seal, and Texas Humidity did what Texas Humidity does. Emma texted me a photo of a blouse from Zara, asking if it was too much. I sent back a thumbs up and a joke about it, looking like a couch cover from my mother's friend's house. We traded grocery items. I told her I'd grab marinara, basil, and ricotta for baked ziti. She told me she had a surprise for dessert. When I got home, the kitchen smelled like Sunday at my Nana's, and Emma moved around in one of my old college tees, bare legs, hair in a messy bun. "We should talk," she said, which in a marriage can mean anything from "the car's leaking something" to "I accidentally Venmo'd your cousin $300. Well, I set down the paper bag and braced for a budget conversation. The kind where you pull out the shared Google sheet and argue about whether a 14 pumpkin candle is a necessity. She says yes. Or a temporary life improvement. I say it's a Ponzi scheme in wax. Instead, she clicked the stove off, wiped her hands, turned, and put that sentence between us like a deposit you can't get back. Give me one night to get it out of my system, just one, before we start trying for kids. People imagine big betrayals arriving with sirens. In reality, they step into your kitchen on quiet feet and ask for a glass of water. I stared at her, not because I didn't understand the words, but because I understood them too well. We were not strangers to honesty. We'd had the hard talks. Early on, I told her about the time I got passed over for a promotion that went to the owner's nephew. She told me about a college boyfriend who measured love in punishments and apologies. We'd built something on the promise that neither of us would ever walk the other to a cliff and ask them to jump alone. "Why?" I managed. She didn't flinch. "Because I don't want to be the mom drinking Chardonnay at noon, writing long texts about the life I never lived," she said, eyes bright but not wet. "Because Liv says regret doesn't disappear, it calcifies. Because we married young enough to wonder what we missed, but old enough to know consequences. Because I want to go into motherhood clean." Clean. The word landed sideways. She wasn't asking to cheat as a habit. She was asking to commit a controlled burn and call the forest healthier for it. She kept talking, filling the space like she was trying to outrun the echo of the ask. "It won't be anyone you know," she said quickly. "It would be compartmentalized. One night, a box I taped shut and put in the attic of my brain. We never have to speak of it again." She had logic ready. Studies about novelty and serotonin, anecdotes about friends who opened up and felt closer, TED Talk abstractions about desire being a river that needs a channel. She was an excellent marketer. She knew how to position a product so the flaws looked like features. I remembered our road trip to Marfa last spring, the windmills at dusk turning slowly like patient clocks, Emma leaning out the passenger window with her hair whipping, yelling that she wanted to feel expansive. I remembered Liv at trivia night, casually dropping the phrase hall pass like it was an upgrade package at a hotel. I remembered Emma scrolling late, the quick lock of her phone when I walked in, the way she set it face down like a sunning turtle hiding its head. I thought about vows recited under string lights behind her sister's Plano ranch house, the dogs in bow ties, the Polaroids that still hang on the side of our fridge under a Buc-ee's beaver magnet, her laughing with cake on her lip, me pretending to feed her like we were in a commercial for buttercream. I thought about the future we'd named, but not yet built, a nursery we hadn't painted, a stroller her cousin promised to hand down, Saturday mornings where pancakes splatter and ESPN hums in the background, and crayons roll under the couch. I also thought about data, about the inputs and outputs I'd always trusted. One night leads to a story grows a shadow, and a shadow crawls under your front door to live with you. I asked who, and she shook her head like names would make it vulgar instead of clinical. "This is about me, not him," she said. I could hear my pulse in my ears like a far-off freight train. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't even angry yet. What I felt was the cold clarity of a man at a blackjack table watching the dealer flip over the exact card he predicted, not because he's psychic, but because the deck was telling the same story all night. Emma stepped closer, fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm she was trying to sell. "I'm asking now, before we bring another human into this," she said. "I'm trying to do the right thing the wrong way, maybe, but I'm trying. There are moments in a marriage where you decide the temperature of the rest of your life." I could hear our neighbor's sprinkler ticking through the open kitchen window, could smell the basil, could see the stack of mail by the fruit bowl, an oil change coupon, a credit card offer, a baby catalog we never requested. I set my keys down on the counter one by one so I wouldn't clench my hand and do something stupid like throw them. I looked at my wife, at the woman who still snores softly when she falls asleep on the couch, who insists on washing new sheets before we put them on because factory air creeps her out, who texts me photos of dogs in Halloween costumes and says, "Ours next year." I took a breath that felt like it dragged Texas through my lungs and said, very softly, "Okay." Her eyes widened, shock, then relief, then something else, until I added, "But only if we do it my way." And that's when the spoon in her hand stopped moving and the sauce on the stove began to burn. When I said my way, what I really meant was that her request had just cracked open a vault in my mind, and I wasn't going to slam it shut. Instead, I was going to stand there, flashlight in hand, and catalog every hidden drawer. If she wanted a controlled burn, then I was going to test just how much fuel she already had stacked in the basement. The first week after that kitchen conversation, Emma seemed lighter, like she'd unburdened herself by speaking the words out loud. She cooked more, hummed while folding laundry, even slid her cold feet under me at night, the way she used to. But when a person suddenly acts like they've rewound the clock, you notice the missing scratches on the film. Her phone, for example, was practically glued to her palm. She used to leave it charging on the counter while we sat on the couch. Now it followed her to the bathroom, to the garage when she moved laundry, even to the backyard when she pretended to deadhead flowers that weren't blooming yet. One evening, I was in the garage replacing an air filter in the water heater when her car door thunked shut. She was getting groceries, but the paper bag she carried in had only a bottle of wine, a wedge of brie, and a receipt crumpled so deep into her purse you'd think it was radioactive. That same night, while she showered, I fished the receipt out. It wasn't Kroger, it wasn't Target. It was a line item from a hotel bar in Addison, time-stamped 6:43 p.m., 2 martinis, a burger, and fries, paid in full with her Chase card. That's when the spreadsheet in my head began to populate. Inputs, outputs, timeline, locations, receipts, every tiny data point. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I set up a quiet investigation, the kind you run like a side hustle, invisible but consuming. First tool, the family iPad. Emma had synced her iMessage account there ages ago, back when she wanted to text her sister while baking without smearing flour on her phone screen. I dusted it off from under the couch cushions and charged it. When the screen flickered to life, I saw only empty conversations. But messages don't vanish without reason. She'd unsynced. That knowledge was its own kind of message. She was sweeping the floor before I had a chance to look under the couch. Second tool, our shared credit card statement. I pulled it up during my lunch break at the office. My desk sat in a glass cubicle overlooking stacks of ductwork and coiled copper tubing, but my eyes were glued to digital ink. Emma's charges used to cluster around Target runs and Trader Joe's. Now there were Uber rides at odd hours, 9:15 p.m. on a Thursday from Uptown to Garland, a nail salon in Deep Ellum that I'd never heard her mention, and the hotel bar, repeating every other week like clockwork. Third tool, my own eyes. I started leaving for work early, pretending I needed to check inventory, but instead I'd loop back, park down the block, and watch our driveway. Twice I saw her leave mid-morning dressed not for the office, but for something curated. Hair smooth, lipstick set, clothes too polished for a cubicle. She'd drive toward Dallas, and I'd tail her at a distance, my F-150 blending in with the morning rush. Both times she ended up at that same hotel off the tollway. She parked, walked in, and didn't re-emerge for 2 hours. By the second stakeout, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from rage, yet, but from the sick thrill of confirmation. Suspicion had solidified into pattern, and pattern meant truth. One Saturday, I played handyman around the house, tightened hinges, swapped out smoke alarm batteries, while Emma met Liv for brunch. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Without thinking, I picked it up. Locked, of course. But the preview lit the screen. A text from L, not Liv. It read, "Same room next week. You bring the excuse, I'll bring the wine." My breath went shallow. L could have been Liv, or it could have been someone else entirely. The ambiguity was almost crueler than certainty. I set the phone down exactly as it was, screen smudges intact, and kept screwing a hinge into place as if I hadn't just seen my marriage in 12-point font. That night, I began my own file, not on the computer, too risky, but in a black moleskin notebook I kept in the garage. Page 1, hotel receipts. Page 2, Uber trips. Page 3, the text preview. Each entry dated, each page marked with a tab. It wasn't anger propelling me, it was documentation. If she wanted to negotiate reality with words, I'd counter with evidence that spoke without stuttering. The more I gathered, the less she knew me. I became quieter at home, which she mistook for agreement with her plan. She'd float ideas over dinner about when to start trying for kids, how she wanted to repaint the guest room, how maybe we could take that trip to Big Bend in spring. Meanwhile, I stared at her fork scraping the plate, wondering whose fingerprints were already pressed into her skin. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I'd been out at a supply run in Irving, stuck in traffic on the 635, when Emma texted she'd be late at the office. Something in me snapped, not out of impulse, but calculation. I rerouted, drove straight to the Addison Hotel, parked 2 rows back from the front entrance. At 7:12 p.m., I saw her silver Accord glide in. She stepped out in a dress I'd never seen, black heels clicking like a metronome on the asphalt. Minutes later, a man in a navy blazer walked up. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The way she tilted her head, the way his hand brushed her elbow as they walked in together, it was more damning than any embrace. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, pulse pounding in my ears, phone camera raised but shaking too much to get a clear shot. Instead, I waited. 2 hours. Then they came out, laughing, his hand on her back, guiding her like he'd practiced the gesture for years. They parted at their cars, her to the Accord, him to a black Lexus, and drove separate ways. I tailed her home, headlights off until the last block. She parked, walked in, and 15 minutes later I followed, carrying takeout I'd grabbed as cover. She smiled, kissed my cheek, thanked me for dinner, the same lips that had just curved around laughter with him. That night, while she slept, I printed the credit card statements at the office, highlighted the hotel charges, and tucked them into the moleskin with the Uber receipts and the scribbled note, 7:12 p.m., Addison Hotel, navy blazer. Suspicion was dead. What I had now was a living, breathing truth, and the next move wouldn't be silent. There's a certain silence that builds before you pull the pin on a grenade. I felt it the morning of Emma's birthday dinner. She had planned it herself, nothing extravagant, just a group of friends at a trendy Italian spot in Uptown, white tablecloths and votive candles, the kind of place where everyone orders a different pasta so they can taste each other's. On the surface, it was just another birthday, but I knew it would be the night the mask slipped. I had spent the afternoon in my office, hunched over the moleskin notebook that now bulged with receipts, Uber records, and the time-stamped note from the Addison Hotel. On top of the pile, I placed the hotel receipt with the double martinis, highlighted in neon yellow, and beside it, a printed photo from my phone of Emma walking into the lobby with the man in the navy blazer. I had finally steadied my hand that night to capture it. Evidence didn't lie, even when people tried to talk circles around it. At 6 o'clock, I showered, shaved, and put on the dark jacket Emma had bought me last Christmas. She came out of the bedroom in a red dress I hadn't seen before, form-fitting, sharp, too deliberate for a casual dinner. She smiled, asked if I liked it, and I told her she looked stunning. She beamed, kissed me lightly, and didn't see the storm brewing behind my eyes. The restaurant was buzzing when we arrived. Our friends gathered around a long table near the window, wine glasses already half full. Love was there, of course, perched at the end like a queen bee, tossing her hair back as if she owned the air around her. Emma slid into her seat beside me, glowing under the attention. Laughter rose, menus opened, waiters hovered. To anyone else, it was a celebration. To me, it was a courtroom. I waded through appetizers, through small talk about vacations and new jobs. My fork tapped against my plate like a metronome. When the waiter poured refills of Chianti, I reached under my chair and pulled out a manila envelope. I set it on the table with a dull slap. The chatter dimmed like someone had turned the volume knob. Emma glanced at it, then at me, her smile faltering. "What's that?" she asked, voice tight. "This," I said evenly, "is the truth. Since we're all here to celebrate honesty, right?" I slid the envelope across the table and let the contents spill out. Receipts fanned like playing cards, highlighted statements, the printed photo of her walking into the hotel. The table went still. Forks froze in midair. Emma's face drained of color. She reached for the papers, but Liv snatched one up first, eyes wide. "Emma, what is this?" "It's nothing," Emma snapped, her voice high, defensive. "This is..." He's making it sound worse than it is. "Worse than it is," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the low hum of the restaurant. "Because it looks like martinis at a hotel bar. It looks like Uber rides at 10 p.m. It looks like a man in a navy blazer guiding you through a lobby with his hand on your back." A couple at the next table glanced over, then another. Phones lifted, subtle but not subtle enough. In 25, a public confrontation is never truly private. Emma's eyes darted around, panic flashing. "Ryan, please, not here." "Here is exactly where," I said, my tone sharp as glass. "You begged me for just one night before kids. You sold it like a noble sacrifice. But the truth? You already cashed in your hall pass, didn't you?" Gasps rippled around the table. Liv muttered something about boundaries, but her voice was drowned out by the rising tension. Emma reached for my hand, but I pulled it back like it burned. "It wasn't like that," she whispered, trembling now. "Then tell them what it was like," I shot back, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Tell your friends why your Uber history looks like a breadcrumb trail to adultery. Tell them why your credit card loves that Addison hotel so much. Go ahead, Emma. Sell your pitch." Her lips parted, but no words came. Silence clung to her like smoke. Someone at another table chuckled nervously, thinking it was a scene from a bad drama. But then they saw my face, steady, unflinching, and realized it was all too real. Liv shifted uncomfortably, distancing herself. A couple of Emma's co-workers stared down at their plates, as if pasta could shield them from collateral damage. The waiter froze mid-step, holding a tray of tiramisu that suddenly seemed absurd in its normalcy. And then, humiliation, the moment I'd anticipated. Emma broke. Tears welled in her eyes, smudging the mascara she'd so carefully applied. "I made a mistake," she choked out, her voice cracking. I thought if I got it out of my system, I could..." "Be clean?" I interrupted. That was the word, wasn't it? Clean. But you don't wash off betrayal with martinis and hotel linens. You don't scrub it away before kids. You track it into the nursery like mud, and it stains everything. Her sobs drew attention now from every corner of the restaurant. Glasses clinked nervously, conversations muted. And then, almost predictably, someone's phone recorded it all. The confrontation, the evidence on the table, Emma's tears spilling under the candlelight. I stood, the chair scraping loudly behind me. "You wanted one night," I said, voice steady but cold. "Instead, you just bought yourself a lifetime without me." I gathered the remaining papers, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it under my arm. Then I dropped 2 20s on the table, enough to cover my half of the meal I hadn't touched, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Emma's voice, faint and desperate. "Ryan, wait!" But the door swung shut, the night air hit me like a slap, and the sound that followed wasn't her voice at all. It was the faint ding of a phone notification, a video upload in progress, the truth already spiraling out into the world. The video hit Reddit before I even made it home. Some stranger with a quick thumb had posted it under RR True Off My Chest with the title, "Guy Exposes Cheating Wife at Her Birthday Dinner. Whole Restaurant Froze." By the time I parked in my driveway, headlights sweeping over the garage door like searchlights, the clip had already been cross-posted to R Justice Served and/or Relationship Drama. I sat there in my truck, engine idling, phone buzzing non-stop in the cup holder. My life had gone viral, and I hadn't even taken off my jacket. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same. Emma's shoes by the door, her throw blanket draped over the couch, the faint smell of basil from that long-ago night when she'd made her confession. But silence hung heavier than furniture. She wasn't home yet. I dropped the envelope on the kitchen island and cracked a Bud Light from the fridge, the hiss of carbonation louder than the thoughts rattling in my head. The first few days were chaos. Her family called, her friends texted, her sister showed up at my door demanding to know why I'd humiliated Emma like that. I didn't argue. I handed her the moleskin notebook and told her to flip to any page. By the time she reached the hotel receipt, her voice went quiet. She left without another word. Emma tried, of course. She texted long paragraphs about regret, about how it didn't mean anything, about how she still wanted the life we'd planned. I ignored most of them, but one night I answered the phone just to hear her voice break into sobs the moment I said hello. She begged, actually begged, me to come to therapy, to let her explain, to let her make it right. But there's no glue for shattered glass. You can't rebuild trust from powder. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Maybe it was the video, maybe it was her guilt, maybe it was both. Either way, she didn't fight me on the house, didn't argue over the truck, didn't even try to claw at the savings account we'd built. It was like she knew she'd already lost more than a courtroom could measure. The day the papers were finalized, I walked out of the courthouse into bright Texas sunlight. It was unseasonably warm, the kind of heat that tricks you into thinking summer hasn't left. I loosened my tie, climbed into my truck, and drove straight to a diner off the highway, the same kind where Emma and I had eaten cheeseburgers on the tailgate all those years ago. I ordered pancakes and bacon, sat in a vinyl booth sticky from decades of spilled syrup, and felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Not triumph, not rage, just a quiet, steady peace. Healing didn't come in a dramatic wave. It came in small, ordinary things. A Saturday morning where I sipped coffee on the porch while the dog chased squirrels. A Tuesday night where ESPN hummed in the background while I fixed the squeaky cabinet hinge again, this time without anyone watching. A Sunday drive with the windows down, wind whipping through the cab, no destination in mind. Neighbors dropped by with six-packs, slapped my shoulder, told me I'd done the right thing. One even joked, "Man, you're famous now. Whole world knows you don't take crap." I laughed, but I didn't feel famous. I felt human, wounded, stitched up, and finally healing. The hardest part was letting go of the future I thought I'd have. The nursery, the road trips, the Saturday morning pancakes with crayons scattered across the table. But the thing about betrayal is that it strips away illusions. What I thought was solid had been hollow for a long time. And once you stop pretending, you can start building something real. A month later, I sat on the porch at dusk with a cold beer in hand, the air buzzing with cicadas, and realized I hadn't thought about the hotel receipts in days. The moleskin was still in the garage, but it didn't feel like a weapon anymore. It felt like an old newspaper, important once, but not something you read twice. Emma? Last I heard, she'd left the marketing firm, probably to outrun whispers that followed her like shadows. Maybe she'll land somewhere new. Maybe she'll spin a different version of the story. Maybe she'll find someone who doesn't ask questions. That's her path. Mine is quieter, simpler, because in the end, I learned something that doesn't fit neatly into a Reddit thread or a viral video. Revenge isn't slamming doors or shouting in restaurants. It isn't even catching someone in the act. Real revenge is walking away intact, with your dignity, your peace, and your future still yours to write. I took one last sip of my beer, the night settling in around me, and whispered to no one in particular, sometimes the trash takes itself out. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not bitterly, not ironically, just freely.